All right, this last question is one of the most challenging. So I encourage you is look at this and then give it a shot on your own first. See if you can figure that out. So hit pause and see if you can identify, given two countries' PPFs, what's the price that they would trade one good with another. All right, now that you did that, and I trust that you totally did that, let's look at an example. So Scotland, based on comparative advantage, has a comparative advantage in producing sheep. So if they're going to engage in trade, they're going to be made the best off, as will the other country, if they produce only the good they have a comparative advantage in. So let's assume that Scotland's going to produce 100,000 sheep and Ireland 80,000 sheep. Now how much would they trade? Well, if Scotland only needs 40,000 sheep to make themselves happy, then we can identify the number here, 40,000. And so that means that they're going to export 60,000 sheep to Ireland. All right, so now that you have that, if that didn't help you solve it, let's hit pause. Or if you weren't able to solve it before, let's hit pause and see, can you identify if Scotland sends 60,000 sheep to Ireland, what's the price range that Ireland would set in order to send goats back to Scotland? Okay, so let's look at, to solve this, we're going to look at two scenarios, because there's going to be two prices. One is a price that will make Scotland just as well off and Ireland really well off. Another is to make Ireland just as well off and Scotland really well off. So the first example is, let's suppose Scotland is going to produce 40,000 on their own. And this is the example that we did before, is at best they could produce 45,000 goats on their own. So if Ireland were to send Scotland 45,000 goats in return, Scotland would say, okay, that's fine with us. Let's see what Ireland would say, if they would be okay with that. So if Ireland were to send 45,000, so they're going to export 45,000. So that puts them right about here, because this number will be 35,000. Let's identify what that number is right there for Ireland. So we have 35,000 goats, so we put 35,000 in for here. S is equal to negative 35,000 plus 80,000. So S is 45,000. So for them to be just as well off, they would need at least 40,000 sheep in return, but they're getting 60,000. So that 60,000 number is actually right there. So at the price, let's write it up here, 60,000 sheep for 45,000 goats, Scotland will trade and Ireland will trade. Well, let's look at the other example. So we're going to keep that there, and hopefully it doesn't get too crowded. We'll look at the next example in purple. Let's suppose that Scotland is going to, again, export 60,000 sheep to Ireland. Well, at that point, let's see if Ireland then were to import the 60,000. They would want to send at least this many in return. So let's figure out what this number is right there. So now we would put 60,000 in for sheep. So they would need on their own, if they weren't trading, they could produce 20,000 goats on their own. So they would be willing to ship to export at most 60,000 goats on their own. So the next price we get is 60,000 sheep is going to equal 60,000 goats. So I'm going to take these two prices, I'm going to copy them onto a new worksheet here. So the first price, so price 1, which if we have Scotland and Ireland, the first price is 60,000 goats equals 45, sorry, not goats, but 60,000 sheep equals 45,000 goats. This would make Scotland indifferent, because that's the same thing they could achieve on their own, but it would make Ireland really happy. The second price was 60,000 sheep for 60,000 goats. That price would make Scotland really happy, and Ireland would be indifferent. So these are the two prices we're going to change. Now, if I put this in terms of goats, so I rewrite this, divide each side by 45,000. 1 goat equals 4/3 sheep. And here, 1 goat equals 1 sheep. So the trade is 1 goat would have to be between 1 sheep and 4/3 sheep, or 1.33. And what's interesting about these numbers here, if you look, is this is the same as the opportunity cost of Scotland, and this is the same as the opportunity cost of Ireland. And so the trade prices are going to fall in between the two opportunity costs of the two countries. And so this gives us, this range here, gives us a room for negotiation of what we want to trade. So if they say, hey, we'll trade 1 for 1, Scotland's really happy. Ireland's indifferent. If they say we'll trade 1 for 1.33, Ireland's really happy, Scotland's really is indifferent. So they might negotiate and say, let's trade 1 sheep for 1.2, or 1 goat for 1.2 sheep. That falls in between the middle of this range, and both countries might be slightly happier than they would on their own, and so we can get the gains from trade. So the opportunity cost is what drives the gains from trade and drives the prices for international trade.